Hey, this is Jason, and in this series on how to sell your land in Texas, I want to answer a question about owner financing. If you're going to sell your land with owner financing or possibly even buy land with owner financing, what's a land contract? What is a land contract? Or maybe you've heard the term contract for deed. How do you sell your land with owner financing? So the first question is, why would someone want to do this? Basically, this is becoming the bank. So let's just say I have a piece of property and I'd like to sell it for $30,000. It's some rural land for camping, hunting, recreation, whatever. And a buyer comes along and he says, look, I don't have the $30,000, but I can give you $5,000 or $10,000 down, and I can make you, $500 a month payments for a few years. A lot of people like the idea of doing this. Sometimes retired people on fixed incomes, it can increase their income. Other people maybe have a piece of property they have a hard time selling, and so they like the idea of being able to finance it to someone in order to get the property sold. So what would that look like for a piece of property in the state of Texas? And this would be very similar in other states as well. So if you're selling Texas land with owner financing, there are basically two ways that you can do this legally, and each one of them requires two different documents. However, the first document is the same for both. So that is the promissory note. So if you use a land contract or if you use a deed of trust, and I'll explain both of those, you're always going to need a promissory note. So a promissory note is just a simple loan document. And with any loan, maybe you've signed one for a car loan or a home loan. Promissory note just is what it says. It's a promise to pay. So basically it says, I as the buyer promise to pay you as the seller a certain amount of money over this amount of time. It explains the terms of the loan, the payment amounts, and the final payoff date. And so I'll pull up just a quick image of kind of what this looks like. Here's just a form or template form. It doesn't have any information filled out, but of a standard promissory note. So it just mentions the parties. It'll have the date and names and address as the borrower and the seller are named. And it's going to have the interest rate for that loan. So if you're buying property or you're selling property through a land contract or with owner financing of any type, oftentimes there's going to be an interest rate. And then it also has the first payment date, and it talks about payments that they need to be by the final date. And it'll have the final payment date and the first payment date, and it'll have monthly installments here. So if it's $500 a month or $200 a month or whatever the amount is monthly. And then there's a late fee here. And all of these just set out the parameters to avoid predatory lending. So you can't say, oh, my late fee is $1,000 a month. No, it says it's $20 a month here. This protects both parties in the transaction. Okay, so very simple document. It's just about a page and a half long, and the borrower and the lender are going to sign that. If you are selling your land with owner financing, then you are the lender. You've become the bank. Okay, so you're going to need a promissory note no matter what. Now, that is required for all owner finance sales. Now, another way that you can do this, and this is what I mentioned at the beginning of this video, is the land contract. What is a land contract? So a land contract is also called in the state of Texas and many other states a contract for deed. They're kind of they're both used, and they're interchangeably used, just depending on where you're at and who you talk with. But they're basically essentially the same document. And so the contract for deed is a contract that we have that gives you usage of the property and control of the property as the buyer in exchange for payments. And when you complete those payments, I then deed you the land. Okay, so in this case, this contract, it's usually 2 to 3 pages long, and it can have multiple parameters about the use, etc. And it's going to say that the contract is for the buyer. Now, title for the land stays in the seller's name during the period of this contract. So if this contract is for a 5-year period, and there are going to be 60 monthly payments, then the title for the land is going to stay in your name as the seller. If you already own the land and your name is on title, you are the seller on the contract. You've already made a promissory note, and the buyer is going to be making payments to you. And usually you're going to make something in that contract talking about handling the property taxes and insurance. But at the county level, the deed is still recorded in your name. Now, it's going to be very clear in the contract that once they fulfill the contract, they make the payments, then you are obligated to deed the property into their name at the end of that contract. So that's why it's called a contract for deed. Once they fulfill the contract, they get the deed for the property. Okay, so this is a very common way to do these transactions. I will mention, little disclaimer, it's very common with land, and it's a legal way to do it with land. It's not a good legal option in Texas for a piece of property with a residence on it. So for a house, it is not a very good legal option. It's looked down upon in the courts. There's been some issues in that sense. But for just vacant land, it is still used. It's a common instrument, and it's a legal way to do that. I would suggest, obviously, not necessarily doing this yourself. Look for legal advice. I am not a lawyer. This is just purely educational. And go ahead and consult with a real estate attorney there locally before you do this. Okay, the second way is a deed of trust. And this is another very common way of doing this, a legal way to owner finance land in the state of Texas. And this is also done in many other states as well. The seller will create a promissory note, and then they will deed the property into the buyer's name. So they will actually transfer deed, close on the property, but they will create a mortgage against that deed. It's called a deed of trust in the state of Texas. They'll create a mortgage or deed of trust on the property, so it'll be on title. So there's a lien on the title. Now, the buyer then is, under the promissory note, is required to make the payments, and once the buyer completes the payment plan, the mortgage will be released by the seller, and then they'll own it free and clear. So they could, technically resell the land, but they would have to first pay off this mortgage. So the only major difference is that they do transfer the deed, and for both of these are good instruments and good options for owner financing. The way that if the person stops paying and it needs to be foreclosed on is a little bit different for either of these, but you would want to go through a real estate attorney to do that. Okay, so owner financing is a great way to sell land in Texas, especially if you have rural property and you're looking to sell it and trying to find a way to do it. It is possible, and you can do that with a promissory note and a land contract or a deed of trust. All right, thank you for watching this video, and like and subscribe to this channel for more great content.